Hi there, this is Ronnie coming at you with kind of a long video. Um, as I intimated when I did my True 20 list of campaign settings I have a few, bit of an understatement, a few for Savage Worlds. This is the Savage Worlds Deluxe Explorer's Guide. This is the current version. From what I can gather, Pinnacle are coming out with a new one this year. Hopefully, again, it will be a nice little digest size that you can buy for less than a tenner. And there are a fair few different campaign settings that people have done. So I've bought a few. I haven't played them all, obviously. Some of them I have used, some of them I haven't. I will give more interesting opinions on those I have used when I get to them. But what I will be doing is going through all the ones that I have. And hopefully it will show the sort of length and breadth of what you can get with Savage Worlds in terms of campaign settings. I've got these split into roughly 3 camps. I've got science fiction, I've got pulp steampunk, and I've got fantasy, urban fantasy, nudging into horror. But the sort of jump between fantasy and urban fantasy is urban fantasy and horror can be blurred anyway. So I'm going to start with sci-fi, simply because there's a lot to get through, folks. So bear with me. And the other reason is, like the True 21, I want to start with a fan-made one that I got. This is Savage Star Wars. Now, when I mentioned True Force, which is the True 21, I mentioned that there was a lot of good character creation and it's got a lot of depth. And if I wanted to run a game that was very much key towards that, I would use True 20 for it. If I want just fast-paced action, this is the doozy. It really is. When I ran my shootout, this was the one between the 4 versions that I have that really captured that cinematic feel far more than the others. So this is the one that really I would suggest. Next up, I'm not doing these in alphabetical. I'm doing these, Now, a lot of these sci-fi settings I got because I wanted to. In fact, I'm just going to change over one of the things because I'm going to do this one first. This is the one that I have used, which is Last Parsec. Now, this is very much a sort of generic. You require not only the core rulebook but the sci-fi companion to run Last Parsec, and it essentially gives a setting for the various races that you can play in that the sci-fi companion gives you. It's good. I have ran it. The only problem I have is that there's not a lot of meat on the bone, which for a campaign setting I find a little didn't. It could have been better in terms of meat on the bone. Because of that, and because the sci-fi companion has a good few sort of ideas for xenomorphs and so on, alien creatures you might get, but it's nowhere near the sort of vast sort of thing that say the fantasy companion has. So I was always looking for settings and also sort of maps of worlds and so on. I mean, I'm a little too old and a bit too lazy to sit there and try and map stuff, and so I'm always looking for settings. And one that caught my eye was this one, which is Mercenary Breed. I mean, it's straight up all action. You know, it's war, there's political machinations. It intrigues me. The other one that really intrigues me, which I don't have and I'm still considering, is Double Spiral War. But there's a lot here, more edges, more hindrances, more options for players on top of that. And there's no reason why you can't use last parsec characters and just drop them in here. Which is one of the reasons I got it. It just gives me more stuff to play with. In terms of enemies, in terms of playable races, and that I like about it. On that same regard, Nemesis, it sets itself up as what would happen if you sort of took on, say, the sort of elder gods of some, you know, sort of Lovecraftian elder gods, these great sort of alien beings, woke up and decided, you know, let's kick humanity's ass, and humanity went, well, we've got big guns, mate. And essentially that's what Nemesis sort of goes for. So a lot of the sort of weaponry in here is quite big. A lot of the sort of adversaries in here are, you know, you got some sort of basic creatures, but there's a lot of sort of big adversaries, and again, it gives me more options, which I really like. Nova Praxis, the idea of this intrigued me very much, and I was wondering about how I was going to use it, and then the other day I watched the Netflix TV series Altered Carbon. Right here, folks. The idea that your consciousness is downloaded onto a singularity, and your mind and your consciousness can then be uploaded to various bodies to go out and do missions and so on. I mean, you could do Altered Carbon or something in that style with this without sweat. Although it's sort of more in the future, so it's a bit more high tech. I'm looking forward to running this. I think you could do a lot. Could do a really dark edge on this, which works for me a lot. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to running this. Broken Earth, which is that whole sort of post-apocalyptic thing, which I wanted at least one sort of post-apocalyptic sort of setting. You know, everything's went to hell and you are sort of trying to pick up the pieces and so on. And I like that idea a lot. It's again, it gives me options, and it's a different kind of science fiction, more sort of, you know, dystopian future fiction, and I like dystopia, so yeah, it's gonna work for me. I picked this up the other day. I've been looking at this for a while, and I found it for a nice price on Driver RPG, which is Eldritch Skies, which is essentially the Migo, the Cthulhu mythos. I mean, they came down just like Lovecraft's book said, and we got hold of their tech, and we're going into the stars. It's the idea of we're travelling to see them rather than them coming down looking at us. So there's a vein of horror in it, but it's much more sci-fi than sort of existential dread that Call of Cthulhu is. It takes the mythos and treats them as alien races, rather than sort of mind-numbing terror, which is a nice switch for me. I like that notion a lot, and I'm looking forward to using it. Last but not least, for the sci-fi ones, is Interface Zero. Interface Zero is basically, it's cyberpunk. I mean, I don't want to say it's the official cyberpunk game for Savage Worlds, except for the fact that the Savage Worlds sci-fi companion has some very basic hacking rules. But it actually says if you want some detailed hacking rules, get Interface Zero. Now, I have used this. I've run a game of this. It is very good. Cyberpunk is not one of my really strong areas when it comes to genre, but I really enjoyed using this. I can see me using aspects of this along with Nova Praxis, which I think could be an interesting sort of amalgamation. Also, you could always use this and add elements from the Fantasy Companion, and you've got Shadowrun easily, with an actual workable system. Yes, folks, you can use this and get an actual working version of Shadowrun that doesn't use a bucket of dice. So that's the sci-fi stuff. If you give me a moment, we will carry on with the rest. So next, let us do Pulp and steampunk. Thrilling Tales, 2nd edition. It's 1930s, 1920s, 1930s, 1940s pulp, writ large. This was one of those, yes, I have to get this books. It really was. I so wanted to get this. I've yet to use it. I really want to bring it in and run it with my my gaming group at my local gaming store, because I just think it would just be so much fun. I just like the idea of doing the sort of Saturday morning serials, quite literally ending. I mean, I've seen Pair of Geeks did one about not ending things on a cliffhanger. You know, or ending things where the next thing is going to be a fight. But I think with something like Pulp, you have to end it on a cliffhanger. It's the only way to do it, folks. It has to be a cliffhanger. Noir Nights. Something I'm going to talk about in a minute with Clockwork Dreams. Noir Nights. There's just about enough here to run a game, but I mean, for all of that, there's really not a lot of setting. There's some ideas, and then there's some ideas for characters, and then some adventures, but there's no real breadth and depth of background in this one, and it's a shame. What I'm going to end up doing is pulling ideas from Noir Nights and adding them to Thrilling Tales and doing it that way. So Noir Nights has now become, for me, an expansion onto Thrilling Tales. Didn't start that way, but having read the book, nothing else I can do. Right, the fact that I have bought a steampunk game should come as no surprise to anyone. There's not actually that much in the way of steampunk on Savage Worlds. This, however, is undoubtedly the best that I've seen, which is the widening gear. It's a good, you know, it's good. It's a good setting. It doesn't have the sort of fantasy elements of something like Falkenstein. It's more your sort of straight up steampunk. Obviously, with it being Savage Worlds, it would be easy to add those fantastical elements into it. New edges, new hindrances, adversaries, and so on. It's not bad. I like it. Again, it's one I want to play, and I might run this at my local gaming store. See above, Noir Nights for Clockwork Dreams. Again, look at that. It's beautiful, lovely. The artwork, no bloody depth to it. The worst thing about it is that it's set in a world. It's set in a sort of dreamscape world, and there's no map because the whole thing works like a cog on a wheel, which sounds great as a theory, but it makes it impossible to map. So it would be difficult for me to create. I think it doesn't have the sort of potential. What it does allow for are sort of fantastical elements that I can add to the widening gear, and because of that, I'm happy to have it. But it really should have stood up on its own, and it doesn't, and it's a shame. So that's Pulp and Cyberpunk, Steampunk dealt with. Fantasy, of which there is a crushing amount. What can I say? Fantasy and urban fantasy, tinging on horror. Speaking of fantasy tinging on horror, we start with Ultima Forsan. This was originally an Italian game which has been translated to English. The setup for this is it's our medieval Europe, although the map has been redrawn. This is due to the fact that the Black Plague is an ongoing situation, and it reanimates the dead. And you are knights of the church, for the most part, who are sort of crusading through the lands and trying to find a cure, or at least stop the dead. It's Walking Dead medieval style. I played a game a couple of years ago called Shadows of Esterin, which had this really sort of dark, gritty sort of it had its own world, but it had the feeling of our sort of medieval / Renaissance world with a really dark horror, sort of fantasy horror pitch to it. And I really liked that game. I really enjoyed playing it. I have a feeling that this will give me that same dark edge that I can do. And there's a lot here. So, plenty to use. So I'm looking forward to using this one. From the very dark to what could be quite light. Mythos. Yes, because as a kid growing up, I watched a lot of Ray Harryhausen movies, Clash of the Titans, Jason and the Argonauts, the Sinbad movies, and they were wonderful. Always, I'm not going to say I'm any expert on Greek mythology. I am not. But I've always been fascinated by it. And this allows you to play in ancient mythic Greece. This is not in any way, shape, sense or form meant to be a historical document. You are playing the kind of the offspring of gods. You know, you are going to be the mighty heroes of Greece. You know, the people who will be their legends. Really looking forward to using this. If I have to mark this down at all, it's for this. The name of the game is not on the spine. Bit of an oversight there, folks. It really should be on it. But otherwise, not bad at all. Really looking forward to using that. Codex Infernus Guide to Hell, Savage Guide to Hell, is the idea of bringing a version of Hell that you can use in your Savage Worlds games. Now, the reason I put it in my fantasy section is that it does actually come with its own little fantasy setting that has basically been overrun by Hell. So it's fairly dark fantasy. But it gives you notes on how to incorporate a hell dimension into most other genres. So for that reason, it can be quite it can be quite useful for more than just fantasy. Really intriguing. I could add elements of this to just about every game I've got, so it's amazingly useful. Speaking of where I could use it, again, Judgment Day. I mean, I put it in my fantasy system because it's got magic and so on, where you're playing witchfinders and sort of demon hunters. The three settings it gives you is to use it in medieval times, or to use it in Victorian times, to use in modern day. So you can have sort of fantastical elements in medieval times. I could get elements of this and add it to Widening Gear. I could take elements of this and put it into any of my urban fantasy games. So it's incredibly useful as a piece, and I'm very, very happy to have it. Guild of Shadows. This is a campaign guide. It's got its own sort of setting, but it's really about bringing in the Rogues Gallery into Guild of Shadows, into your games. So you can use thieves and assassins and footpads, and burglars as archetypes, and professional edges and so on. And you can easily add this to your fantasy games. I suppose urban fantasy to an extent, but certainly to your fantasy games, and add some variety to them. So it's a little, I don't want to say it's darker, I don't want to say it's dark fantasy per se, but it allows for a bit more moral ambiguity with your characters, and I'm all for that, and it's a nice thing to have, and it's nice production values on it. Urban fantasy setting. Contagion. Now this really straddles the line between urban fantasy and horror. It pretty much sets itself up as a horror, but the fact is, you could dial down the horrific aspects of this, and you've got Buffy. I mean, the fact that it's got someone pretty much ready to go, you could run Buffy using Contagion quite easily. Now, Contagion does require not only the core book, but both the fantasy and horror companions. So it's really reliant on the background of a lot of the books to run this properly. The interesting thing about this is the use of contagion points, where you have points. They work in a similar way to bennies, but you only have a finite set of points. They can increase if you increase your core attributes, but you only have a finite set of points, and how you regain those points are different from bennies. Bennies can go back and forward quite happily, and whilst you might start with 3, you may end up with more at the end of a session. More than 3, you know, 'cause things go back and forth. Contagion points, once you use them, you lose them. Getting them back for humans is a good night's sleep. For vampires, it's drinking blood, and so on. So that there's different ways. It allows for a lot of moral ambiguity. Thankfully, there's enough balance in the game, i.e., the various races that you can go have some stunning bonuses and some crippling minuses, which help balance things out. I like the idea. I really want to run this. I really do. Yeah, you could really do intense sort of action, urban fantasy stroke horror with this game very, very easily, and I really want to run it. Olympus Inc. I love the idea of this. I'm about to play a game of corporation, which is basically, the sort of near future sort of cyberpunk with all the action and everything ripped up to 11. The idea of different corporations vying for control against each other. Now, Olympus Inc. takes that very idea and adds a Greek myth twist to it. The notion is that the gods of Olympus have been kicked off of Mount Olympus, and they've formed Olympus Inc. And the various gods own their own sort of departments within Olympus Inc. And the player characters will be representatives and employees of Olympus Inc. up against Titan Incorporated, i.e. the Titans, and it's an ongoing battle. Does require the use of the Superpowers Companion to run this fully. I'm really looking forward to running this. I think it will be fun. I think it will allow me to do something in the style of Corporation, but with a rule system I'm very, very familiar with, and just enough of an urban fantasy edge to make it different. So I'm looking forward to you running this. I think it should be a blast. I really do. Last but not least, Shinetar, which I'm running at the moment. Love this. Absolutely adore this game. It's high fantasy. It's epic in scale. I mean, you could do pretty much everything. It's just wonderful. Unlike a lot of other Savage Worlds settings, which are a little different, this one is a bit more straight on. This is as close to sort of straight on fantasy as a setting that I think has ever been released for Savage Worlds. Other things has been like Sundered Skies, where the fantasy setting blew up and the world is actually sort of floating in its own little void in large chunks that you have to fly between. Or Hellfrost, which is it's a fantasy setting, but it's perpetual winter. Shinetar is straight up, if you want to do that D&D thing, but you don't like the extreme complexity of D&D, Shinetar's your man. It's wonderful. I would recommend this to anyone. to get it. It's fantastic. Do get it. Do buy it. It's great. So that's it for part 1. Yes, there will be a part 2. It should be shorter, but there will be a part 2. So thanks for watching this part 1, and I'll be back soon with another video.